Welcome back. Donald Trump and his new U.S. regime have made it clear that they are looking to shake up the world of foreign policy. With threats of tariffs and more against several countries, will the U.S.'s aggressive stance see a new global superpower rise up? If so, who could that be over the next 5 years? To help us answer this question, I'm joined in studio by Professor Anthoni Van Nieuwkerk, a UNISA professor in international and diplomacy studies. Prof, thank you so much for your time and for joining us in studio. In your words and in your view, what defines a superpower? Is it the military? Is it the strength of that military, the economic strength that a country could have, the technological factors? What defines a superpower?
It's all of the above. Academics talk about a global hegemon or exercising hegemony, which is control and influence over others. And in fact, others allow the superpower to control world affairs, but they also need the support of the others. So it's a recognized leader, if you want. That's a superpower. Of course, it must have a very strong economy and a strong military and very strong diplomacy in order to maintain that position of power. I like to think of superpowers as empires. Think of, in history, the British Empire.
Right.
They came and colonized us and many others, the Romans, the same thing. But empires rise, reach a peak, decline, and wither away, or even die. Empires come and go. The American empire has risen to its peak, and I think it's beginning to decline, which then raises the question, in this world of competition, and where every nation is for him or herself, who will be the rising empire to challenge the decline of the Americans?
So I want us a little later on to really delve into who would that next empire and superpower be. But what would a world look like where, now this peak that you make mention of Donald Trump, with the US having then going through this decline under the leadership of Donald Trump?
Yeah. So my view is that for several administrations now, America's moral influence, power and standing in the world has been declining. Their financial muscle and their military muscle is not yet in decline. I'm not contesting that. They've got the biggest army in the world. Sometimes they make mistakes. The dollar is the currency to trade with and is not under threat. But over the past couple of decades, the Americans have seen that their grip on power, where its word is law, is beginning to decline. And in fact, many countries are challenging this so-called manifest destiny. You know, Americans are very arrogant, those in power, not all Americans, those who capture political control or power. As we see with Trump, he's vice president, he's foreign secretary, his military, and so on. The team there around Trump, they're very arrogant and they want to reclaim what they believe they have lost under Biden, which we must all admit was a sorry, sad state of affairs. Now Trump is back. He wants to, in my view, like Putin, reclaim past glory and make America great again, meaning reposition or re-establish America as the #1 superpower in the world. And he wants the Europeans and the Americans and the Africans to listen to him and his administration. His rule is iron. He will decide what must happen next. I can tell you now that the international community broadly and the global south in the developing world, we don't like this anymore, where one country controls and decides what is good for democracy, what is good for the economy, and who are your friends and who are your enemies. And in fact, we can feel it on our skin because Trump has sent out his envoys and his messages, including to South Africa. In our foreign policy, we've made choices. We have friends. I don't think we have many enemies, but we select our friends in the international community, particularly in the global south. Donald Trump says, no, you can't make those choices. I'm going to punish you.
Right. Speaking about that, I mean, there's a gathering in Munich.
Yes.
Talk to us about President Zelensky and his utterances with regards to the conflict that's happening in that region and Trump's input in that. Yeah,
so the Munich Security Conference, past 3 days, it's the premier platform, if you want, for Europeans and the West to come together to talk about security. And it's been going for many years. In fact, Vladimir Putin once went there and said, if we don't settle on Ukraine, there will be a coming war. And then there was a war. So this past 3 days, these Westerners were talking about their fears of security going the wrong way. Zelensky was in the room. Vance, the American vice president, was in the room, and he said to the Europeans, you must sort out your own problems. We're not going to support you all the time. And the Europeans are panicking. This is my view. The mood in Europe is a bit, they see the future as dystopian. Bleak, without order, depressing, no protection. What is going to happen to us? And so Zelensky says, can you please give me another 1 million troops and your F-16s because I want to fight and win the war against Putin? The Europeans are panicking. They don't have the money or the economies of scale to do what Zelensky asks for. In the meantime, Trump phones Putin for 90 minutes and says, how can we make a deal? Without involving the EU or the Europeans. So they're on the back foot and they don't know what to do. It was the most depressing security conference in many years.
And that surely shows a shift in power, especially for the Europeans.
Yeah, so the Europeans, in my view, it's a strong statement to make now, they've become largely irrelevant in determining the course of global politics. They need to focus inward. In fact, in Europe, as we know, in 10 days there's another election in Germany which might swing to the right. And there are many right-wing swings. So Europe is drifting to the right, and it's inward-looking. Trump is determining the rules of the game, and he's talking to the Russians, the Chinese. He doesn't even recognize BRICS. He plays games. He says, is China a member of BRICS? BRICS, in the meantime, the alliance to which we belong as South Africans, has China as the leader.
Of course. Speaking of China, I mean, let's talk about and assess its trajectory in becoming the superpower. They're waiting behind the pillar, very slowly in the wings. Are there any unexpected moves that we could see from China?
So, so in my way of thinking about global history, empires rise and decline. It takes many centuries. China is a rising empire in the East. It is economically very strong now. It has a very strong foreign policy, the Belt and Road Initiative. It's pulling in many allies and countries to work with them. They're building up their military, and they have an increasing cultural influence or a footprint across the world. They're offering an alternative world view to that of the Americans. And that is very powerful, but it'll take time to impact. So there's no immediate surprises behind that pillar. But as Africans, what we need to understand is, what will America do to maintain its grip on power? And there are surprises. Trump is a disruptor, so there will be surprises. What will the Europeans do? They are crying in the corner. They are sulking because they are being ignored. What will China do? And the alliance there around China, so the BRICS alliance.
Yes.
It's Russia, China, some Arab Gulf states, 3 or 4 African states, including South Africa, and also Iran, which the Americans hate. So there's your balance of power. And I think China is very careful to exercise brute force and brute power. It is culturally and diplomatically quite sophisticated. It doesn't have a Trump style of making noise and scaring people away. In fact, it's doing the opposite. If I can say like this, when the Westerners and the Americans come to Africa, they blow up things.
They do.
And they steal things. When the Chinese come, they build bridges.
Yes.
Literally. Now, of course, a cynic will say they build bridges and roads and harbors and ports to export our minerals and materials to feed their huge economy. But then that means, as Africans, we must make a deal with China and say, don't take this stuff away from us. Let us talk about how we can manage the trade balance or relationship.
And I want us to come back to that Russia-China-US relation to Africa. But before that, I want to understand maybe the power dynamics that Russia has in possibly becoming a superpower in the next coming years.
So President Putin, in my view, is a fairly open book, because he talks a lot and he explains how he thinks, and you can read about this. He says the greatest shock to his political career was when the Soviet Union collapsed and disappeared. And ever since the early 1990s, he's made it his job to restore the dignity, the power and the glory of the Russians and now the Russian Federation. So I don't think Russia has what it takes to become a competing superpower in terms of American and Chinese power and influence. But he wants to play a role, and he is playing a role in Europe. In fact, if you ask me, this is quite a prediction to make. I think he's going to not win Ukraine, but win the settlement. He's going to make a deal with Trump, and there will be some kind of a peace process. He will emerge from that the winner in terms of who gets the most. And Ukraine will not go into NATO. NATO, remember, is the security umbrella that the Europeans desperately need to protect them from what they believe is a very aggressive Russia who wants to expand. I don't think Russia wants to expand and take over Western Europe.
Yeah.
They want to regain some glory and some recognition and some independence from all of these influences. If the Europeans are smart, they must negotiate with Putin. You know, the head of NATO, I think is a Dutch guy, says a year ago, before he became the head of NATO, the war in Ukraine will end when Russia loses. That is now off the table. Russia is not losing. So in terms of Russia's future, it needs to settle this Ukrainian war, which is very costly in terms of all sides. Everybody is paying a heavy price.
Right.
In the future, Russia will then look further afield. Its relationship with China and in BRICS is very important. True. And then the Russians are in Africa. They provide security services.
Yes.
Some people are cynical and skeptical about how that works, but the Russians are here and we must make our trade deals with them as well.
So coming to that then, Prof, the Russians are here, the Chinese are here, the Americans are here and threatening to get out of here. What does this all mean for Africa? Is this a time where Africa can reconfigure itself to remove itself from being under that heavy hand of whoever is a superpower?
You know, we're talking now tonight in the shadow of the African Union having a summit. I hope it's on your news.
Yes.
And I don't know if they've yet selected a...
They indeed have. Yusuf has now become the chair commissioner.
That's right. So it's incumbent upon the African Union to bring together all 54 squabbling nations to agree on a unified global position. So China has an Africa policy. Africa doesn't have a China strategy or a China policy because we, as African nations, we all bargain to get the best deal with the Chinese or the Russians or the Americans or the Europeans. It is really incumbent on the AU to say, here's the continent, we have a position to deal with these superpowers, emerging, declining, it doesn't matter, the heavy hand that you mentioned, on our terms, so that our people can benefit from trade deals. But before we do that, or simultaneously, the AU has the responsibility to silence the guns. The AU is not able to bring peace to Sudan, to the Eastern DRC. As we speak, it's going wrong in the Eastern DRC. And as South Africans, we know that story. The AU has a lot of responsibility because if it doesn't do that, this body of ours, this organization of ours, we will continue to make deals one-on-one and to the detriment of our neighbors. So there's a lot of responsibility for us to understand how Trump is going to approach us, and it's not yet clear to what extent he's going to ignore us or support us. We don't know. He's making threatening noises. The Europeans are panicking, and we don't want to lose them as a trading partner. So there's a lot of diplomacy that and then in the East, the Russians and the Chinese, we have to extend a hand of friendship so that we can have the deals that will build our infrastructure. And by the way, maybe I should end on a positive note.
Yes, please.
To all the young people who are watching this channel, you know, they want education, they want jobs. They want the freedom of expression and thought. They want to be inspired by global leaders. Africans must provide that as well. So when we deal with the superpowers, the emerging, the declining, the ones behind the pillar, in the corner, it doesn't matter. We must say to our partners globally, come and make deals with us, work with us, so that our young people can benefit. Education, jobs, entrepreneurship, and being proud as Africans, because 1.2 billion people in the next 20, 30 years, we might be the rising empire after we've seen all of this global turmoil come to an end. And
all the squabble ending. Thank you so much, Prof, for your insights. Truly interesting. Thank you for joining us. That was Professor Anthoni Van Nieuwkerk, a UNISA professor in international and diplomacy studies, speaking to us there about the potential superpowers that could shift in the next coming years.